Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to talk about one of the most intriguing unique items that's been announced for the Blight League. So this is going to be a unique that will be added to the game when the 3.8 expansion comes out in a couple of weeks' time, and it's Icefang Orbit. Now, this is one of the hardest unique items to figure out how to use if you're not intricately familiar with a lot of Path of Exile's systems. So having a quick look at the stats, you can see adds 1 to 4 physical damage to attacks, yeah, who cares? 21 dexterity, that's nothing much. 25% chance to poison on hit, yeah, that's something, but you can get that very easily elsewhere. 40% increased damage with poison, yeah, that's nice, but you can do better. And then there's these 3 intriguing lines. You are chilled while you are poisoned. Non-chilled enemies that you poison are chilled, and poisoned enemies you kill with hits shatter. So let's go through all of these in order and how you might try to exploit them. So firstly, you are chilled while you are poisoned. Notice that this says chilled. It doesn't give a strength to the chill. It's what's called an indirect chill. These have 10% default chill effectiveness. So this means that if you're just using this item by itself, it will slow your movement and action speed by 10% while you are poisoned. So that's a drawback normally. However, it is worth reminding you that there is this unique item, Winterweave, Coral Ring, that is only available as a fated unique item, so you need to firstly find Blood Boil and the Prophecy Cold-Blooded Fury. Then you need to kill Glace, who is the boss of the beach map, whilst you have the Blood Boil ring in your inventory, and then it will be upgraded to Winterweave. You'll notice that there's a very interesting line. The effect of chill on you is reversed. By default, this means that if you are poisoned, you're therefore chilled 10%, and so instead of a 10% reduction in speed, you get a 10% increase in your speed. That's pretty good, but it's not anything to really write home about, given that there's a pretty high opportunity cost to use Winterweave. You're needing, for this to work, you've got to dedicate 1 ring slot to Winterweave, you've got to dedicate a second to Icefang Orbit, and you also have to be poisoned. All of that just to get a modest speed increase. Yeah, there is something there, but it's not great. However, if you can amp up your default chill effectiveness to a higher degree, Elementalists are particularly good at this, but other characters can pick up increased effective chill, then you can potentially amp up that 10% to be a higher number. So that's the first way that you might consider using the Icefang Orbit ring. I'm not intending to do that. I'm just raising this as a possibility. There certainly are some other people that have been giving a bit more brainstorming along these lines in the Reddit thread for the Icefang Orbit ring. Now, the next line, non-chilled enemies you poison are chilled. I just regard this as a defensive buff. Essentially, think of it as a toned down version of Temporal Chains that stacks with Temporal Chains should you be running it, or stacks with Aspect of the Spider should you be running that. It's just something that is going to restrict your abilities, restrict your enemy's ability to work against you at full power. But the key line at the end, poisoned enemies you kill with hits shatter. This is the really exciting line on this item. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Notice that it says shatter here, and it's a chance to shatter things without freezing them. Herald of Ice is a skill that anyone that's played a cold-based projectile build will definitely have enjoyed using Herald of Ice at various times. As well as adding a small amount of cold damage to spells and attacks, it causes any enemy that you shatter. If you shatter an enemy, they explode and deal AoE cold damage to enemies near them. So by exploding, this means that they leave no corpse on the ground. There's several reasons this can be beneficial. Firstly, if your enemy is a skeleton and it's near a necromancer, the necromancer can't raise it because there's no corpse to raise. But more importantly, if your enemy is a porcupine, there is no potential for it to send out its usual explosion of physical projectiles that porcupines send off. They don't do that when they're shattered because there's no corpse to explode. There's a few other enemies that can cast the spell Corpse Explosion. There is Detonate Dead Totems, one thing that you will find occasionally in maps that have the affix that adds lots of totems everywhere. And there's a couple of map bosses that do it. Most notably is Alira. Alira is found in 2 different maps, Burial Chambers, where she has Soul Eater, and in Spider Forest, where she has an undead assistant. In both of these cases, she has the spell Detonate Dead, and it's particularly dangerous, and this will, like, having a Herald of Ice trigger will protect you. Notice that there is no need on Herald of Ice for you to have dealt cold damage to the enemy, nor does the enemy need to be frozen. It's just if you shatter an enemy. So it will work even if you're not freezing enemies at all. So that's quite interesting. This gives you the ability to, if you can kill an enemy with a hit and it is poisoned, it will shatter and it will trigger Herald of Ice. Now, how can we exploit this? Well, there is a unique item called Volkers Guidance. Now, this drops from the Pale Court. That's the end boss of the prophecy chains. So you have, firstly, you'll have the Plaguemore prophecy, you'll have the various other ones, the Feral Lord and the like. When you complete those, complete the Unbreathing Queen, and there's one other one as well, do all of those, and you will then be able to enter the special Pale Court map. It's only an area level 75, so it's not particularly hard. The Pale Court monsters have pretty low stats, although they have dangerous abilities. And one of the things that they can drop, they'll always drop one unique item when you kill them all, and one of the things they can drop is Volkers Guidance. This has 3 different versions. It can drop as a cold, as a fire, or as a lightning version. What you're going to want here is the cold version. And so that may actually be quite difficult to get your hands on at the start of next league. So Volkers Guidance Cold adds cold damage to spells and attacks, and a moderate amount of it, but not massive. It has life and cold resistance, so the opportunity cost of using it isn't too high. 50% less poison duration is a massive drawback, but it's made up for by the next line. Your cold damage can poison. Also, cold spells have a 20% chance to poison on hit. What this can do, if you're a build that is not particularly scaling cold damage into the stratosphere, you can use the combination of Herald of Ice with the Icefang Orbit to have Icefang Orbit, you are inflicting poisons with whatever your main skill is. So let's say that your main skill is, say, Cyclone. Cyclone, you make it poison somehow, and then Icefang Orbit will mean that the enemies that you hit and kill will explode, and they will trigger Herald of Ice, and then that Herald of Ice will also cause nearby enemies to, because they've taken cold damage, your cold damage can poison, that can potentially cause them to also shatter if you're able to kill them with the initial blast from Herald of Ice. So there's a lot of ways to potentially use this item, and it's an interesting lesson in how, in Path of Exile, an item that looks like absolute rubbish when you first see it can have a number of hidden abilities that just work together in a way that you might just be able to make this work. And lastly, point out that I think you will need, if you're going to build around this unique item, firstly, you're going to need to source them. I've got a feeling this is going to be a very rare item because it is such a transformative item. It's one of those items that, like Chevron's Wrappings, it totally transforms the way your character plays. And so for that reason, and it makes also a whole lot of possibilities available. The reason I think it'll be rare, and it will also be quite sought after, because it does something so unique. So for that reason, I would not suggest building around this item, or at least I wouldn't suggest planning on building around this item prior to the launch of Blight League, unless you're confident enough in your economic ability at the start of a league that you know that you can pick up a chase unique. So if that's something you're confident with, then by all means, give some thought to this. There's a lot of other things that you can undoubtedly do with it, and I'm really interested to see what people come up with. But just one very important thing to reminder with this last line: poison enemies you kill with hits shatter. If they die from the poison, then that means they don't shatter, they just die normally. You have to actually hit them once more. That can be a projectile, it can be a melee strike, it can be a spell. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you hit them. So anyways, that's one of the most interesting and unique items that I've seen in a long time. If you've got any other ideas or if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to mention them below. Otherwise, hope you have a good one.